She still doesn't know I was on the flight. That's the part that haunts me more than the betrayal. The flight from Newark to Atlanta, Delta 1179, seat 14C, exit row. I sat behind a woman in a navy coat who spilled her iced coffee twice and muttered apologies both times. I stared out the window for most of the trip, watching a country pass beneath me that didn't know my marriage had already collapsed, not with an explosion, but with a smirk across a bar. Riley was in first class, 2A. I only found out the night before when I checked her yoga retreat email confirmation and noticed the departure time matched the one I was taking for a client pitch. Same flight, different worlds. You have no idea how quiet a plane feels when your wife is 30 feet away whispering to someone who isn't you. I watched her through the reflection in the lavatory mirror. She was laughing again. That high-pitched version of her laugh she used to save for me. Only now it was his. The man with the charcoal sweater and a face you'd forget if he weren't ruining your life. I didn't confront her. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, tracing the ring in my pocket like it was a grenade pin. By the time we landed, I had made up my mind. I wouldn't scream, wouldn't cry, wouldn't beg her to explain something I already knew too well. Instead, I'd let her feel it, slowly, deeply, and publicly. Because you don't get to turn someone's life into a lie without paying the price. Not when they gave you everything. Not when they bought into the myth of forever with open eyes and trembling hands. And so I planned it, right there in the Uber to my hotel, while she shared a cab with him, thinking she was untouchable. My silence would be the loudest thing she ever heard. And it would start at her sister's engagement gala, the one she begged me not to miss, the one where I'd leave more than just a ring on her chair. I'd leave the last version of myself she'd ever recognize. I arrived at the engagement gala wearing the same suit I got married in. The sleeves were tighter now, the buttons threatened to give out if I breathed wrong, and the shoulders pulled just enough to remind me I'd grown. Not just physically. I was no longer the man who said I do. That guy was soft, gullible, a seat filler in his own life. Now I was someone else entirely, someone no longer interested in maintaining the illusion of grace. The ballroom shimmered with gold filigree and the scent of roses so aggressively perfumed it felt like being smothered in elegance. Her sister, Emma, was beaming in white satin, surrounded by people clinking glasses and pretending this night was about love. Maybe it was for her, but not for me, not for Riley. She hadn't seen me yet. I made sure of that. I arrived early, tucked myself into the social blind spots, the corners people ignored when they were busy performing happiness. I saw Riley walk in with him, the man from the plane. I still didn't know his name, but I didn't need to. Watching them walk in together like it was normal, like their little arrangement was a harmless detail. They had no idea they were stepping into my performance now. And it was a performance. I didn't come for revenge. Not the Hollywood kind. No confrontations. No screaming. I didn't need an audience for my anger. What I needed was impact. Silence has a way of unsettling people when they expect chaos. While Riley mingled, oblivious, I moved methodically. I placed the ring, her wedding ring, on her seat at the head table. Dead center on the velvet cushion, glinting under the chandelier like it belonged in a museum of extinct things. I left no note, no dramatic gesture, just the ring. Cold, honest. Then I slipped out through the side corridor before the speeches began. But I didn't leave the building. I watched from the mezzanine. I watched as Riley returned to her seat, glass of champagne in one hand, her laughter still clinging to the air like smoke. I watched as her smile cracked the moment she saw it. She froze, looked around. Her mouth formed words, but spoke none. Her lover reached for her arm, and she jerked away, eyes scanning the room like she'd seen a ghost in her own reflection. People noticed. Not what was wrong, just that something was. That shift in energy, that ripple that moves through a party when a silent truth sucker punches the atmosphere. I saw Emma walk over, concerned. I saw Riley whisper something. Emma's expression dropped like shattered porcelain. It was working. The discomfort spread like spilled wine on white silk. But what came next wasn't part of my plan. Riley stood. Not slowly. Not with grace. She shoved her chair back, nearly toppling it, and stormed toward the kitchen hallway. Not toward the bathrooms. Toward me. She had seen me. I don't know how. Maybe a reflection, maybe a feeling. But I heard her heels echoing up the stairs. I ducked behind a catering cart as she stormed past, breathing hard, scanning the hallway like a hunter. For the first time, I wasn't sure who was in control anymore. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. She wasn't supposed to look for me. She was supposed to break slowly. But now the game had changed, and I wasn't sure I wanted to keep playing. Not like this. Not with her that close. Not with her this angry. Not when I still didn't know what she'd do. When she finally caught me. There was something humiliating about hiding behind a stack of folding chairs, like I was the one caught cheating. The air in that storage room felt heavier than it should have, thick with lemon-scented cleaner and the metallic chill of commercial refrigeration leaking from the adjacent kitchen. I knew she was coming before the door opened. I could feel it. Riley was never the type to sit still when she was uncomfortable. She'd chase the problem. And tonight, that problem was me. She stepped into the room with the kind of tension you could almost hear. Her heels clicked twice, then silence. My breath stalled as she scanned the shadows. I stayed still, crouched behind a rolling rack of extra linens, watching her through the narrow gap between a stack of silver serving trays and a mop bucket that smelled like someone had cleaned up too many spilled martinis. "I know you're here," she said, her voice flatter than I expected. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but if this is your big performance, you can come out now." Her tone wasn't guilt. It was irritation, like I was an interruption to her curated evening. I slowly stood, not because I wanted the confrontation, but because hiding any longer would have made me feel smaller than I already did. She flinched, barely, but recovered fast. Her eyes met mine with a strange mix of exhaustion and calculation. There wasn't surprise in her face, just readiness. "You couldn't help yourself, could you?" she said, arms folded. "Always needing to make a scene, even if it's in a broom closet." "I didn't make a scene," I replied, quieter than I meant. "I left a ring." "You left a message," she snapped. "In front of my family. On my sister's night." I laughed bitterly, unable to stop it. "Your sister's night? That's what you're worried about?" "Yes, because not everything is about you, Kenneth." She spit my name like it tasted bad. "And don't act like some noble victim. You don't talk to me for weeks at a time. You spend more time with floor plans and light bulbs than you do asking me how I feel. You turned into wallpaper, and then you get offended that I stopped staring at you." There it was, the revised history, the neatly packaged version of events where her choices were just reactions to mine. It made me sick, because there was enough truth in it to sting, but not enough to justify what she'd done. I stepped closer, watching her brace slightly. "So that's your story now? You cheat because I went quiet?" "I didn't cheat," she said quickly, but her voice cracked at the edges. "Not at first." That silence that followed hurt more than the confession itself. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "It doesn't matter." "His name." She didn't answer. "His name." She exhaled slowly. "Daniel." Something in me clenched at that. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't rage. It was deeper, like a recognition of something I hadn't realized I'd lost. The reality of it all set in for the first time. Not just the betrayal, but how far gone we already were. I leaned against the industrial sink in the corner, the cold steel grounding me. "So what now? You run off into the sunset with Daniel, and I just disappear quietly?" "I didn't plan any of this," she said, suddenly softer. "But you don't get to dictate how I fall apart." "No," I replied, "but I do get to decide what I do with the pieces." She looked at me like she didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe she didn't. Maybe neither of us did. And then, just as she turned to leave, she said something that knocked the wind out of my lungs. "You really think Daniel is the problem here?" she asked. "You still don't get it. He wasn't first." Then she walked out, and I stood there in the dark, alone, surrounded by forgotten decorations and the stale echo of something far worse than betrayal, the realization that she had lied about the beginning. This wasn't a crack in the wall. It was rot in the foundation, and I had no idea how deep it went. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. I sat in my car for 2 hours in the parking garage of the venue, engine off, keys in my lap, lights out. Just breathing. Just existing. Trying to make sense of 5 words I couldn't shake. He wasn't the first. There's a version of heartbreak you think you're prepared for. The kind where it's one person, one mistake, one moment of weakness. Something you can hate cleanly. But when it's layered, when it's patterned, when it turns out you were always the last to know, that's a different kind of devastation. It doesn't bleed. It seeps. It contaminates everything you thought was real. I drove to a hotel off the interstate, the kind with faded carpets and vending machines that only take quarters. I told the guy at the front desk I lost my wallet, paid cash, and didn't even bother brushing my teeth. I laid on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, wondering if there had ever been a time Riley looked at me and saw only me. Morning came without sleep. I checked her social media, something I hadn't done in years. She used to post couple pics all the time. Us on rooftops. Us in the mountains. Us at overpriced brunches. But over the last year, it had slowly turned into filtered selfies and story reposts of that smug agency she worked at. I scrolled back, searching for something. A moment I missed. A date that would prove when the real Riley had disappeared. That's when I noticed something. An old photo. Buried. It was a group shot from some corporate retreat. Riley was in the middle, laughing with her head thrown back, holding a glass of wine. Behind her, half hidden by shadows and lens flare, was a man I didn't recognize. Bald. Mid-40s. Wearing a wedding ring. The caption read, "Crushing Q4 with the Dream Team." But the comments were what caught my attention. Him. Let's not talk about what happened after this, grinning face with sweat. Riley. Too late. Already erased from memory, fire face with tears of joy. I clicked his profile. Private. Of course. But his username matched the email address I remembered seeing in her inbox years ago. I'd assumed it was a client. She said it was a vendor. I hadn't thought about it since. So I did something I'm not proud of. I logged into her old tablet. She hadn't used it in months. Still synced. Still alive. I opened her mail. I searched his name. And what I found was worse than I expected. The affair with Daniel? That was recent. Casual. Emotional, sure, but sloppy. Impulsive. But this man, this other man, he had a folder. Labeled Archive. Emails going back 3 years. 3. Full of hotel confirmations, shared Spotify playlists, inside jokes, even a Google Doc they'd used to plan a fake business trip to cover for a weekend in Nashville. Worse, she told him about me. Referred to me as the roommate or the shadow. There were lines about how I'd never ask questions and probably wouldn't notice if she disappeared for a week. She was right. I never did. I read every email, every emoji, every GIF, every shared calendar event. I absorbed them like poison, one drop at a time. I wanted to stop, truly, I did, but it was like peeling back scabs I didn't know were there. The final message from him, dated 8 months ago, was short. I can't do this anymore. Your husband deserves to know. I won't be your secret. She never replied. Maybe that's when she found Daniel. Just a new mask for the same game. By the time I looked up, hours had passed. My hands were shaking, my throat dry. I felt like I'd swallowed gravel. I had gone looking for one answer and found an entirely different question. Had I ever actually known my wife? And more terrifying than that, if I didn't, then what exactly had I been loving all this time? There was no going back to the version of reality where Daniel was the bad guy and I was just the wounded husband. This was deeper. And if Riley had been able to hide this for 3 years, what else hadn't I seen? Because now, I wasn't just mourning a marriage. I was starting to question everything about my own memory. It started with a line in one of the emails. One I almost skipped. He wrote it like a joke, barely a sentence. Still can't believe what you did to that guy in Toronto. You're reckless, Raul's grinning face with sweat. And she replied, he asked too many questions. You saw what happened. No context. No details. But it was the first time I'd seen her referred to as reckless. And it made my skin go cold. Not because I thought she was dangerous. That wasn't Riley. Not my Riley. But because I suddenly realized I didn't know who she was when I wasn't watching. What happened in Toronto? I didn't want to become one of those guys who spirals, who stalks his ex-wife's entire digital footprint like a Reddit detective on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. But that's exactly who I became. I started opening every folder on her tablet, every app, every note, and buried inside a subfolder of Work Travel 2019 was a set of hotel receipts, not scanned PDFs or booking emails, but photos, like she had printed them, then taken pictures before shredding the hard copies. One of them was for a boutique hotel in Toronto, for nights, paid in cash, guest name, blank. But the invoice included an odd detail, a minibar charge for 2 bottles of Japanese whiskey, 3 days in a row. Riley doesn't drink whiskey. Never has. She called it campfire poison. But someone in that room did. I reverse image searched the hotel's logo and found the exact room layout online. Something about it was familiar. Then I remembered. She once posted a photo to her Instagram story of a marble tub. only her legs showing, perfectly posed, a glass of wine in hand. I pulled the image from her archive. Matched the floor tile. Same tub. Same room. Same week. I stared at that photo until the screen dimmed from inactivity. You don't realize how easily someone can rebuild their life in parallel until you see the footprints, the accidental clues they leave behind when they get careless. And Riley had gotten too comfortable. She stopped hiding well. Somewhere along the way, I think she started to believe I'd never look, that I'd never want to see. But now, I was seeing too much. That night, I printed everything. Emails, images, screenshots. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet. Part of me thought maybe I'd mail it all to her mother. Another part of me imagined walking into her office and handing it to her new boyfriend while she stood frozen behind her glass-walled meeting room, watching the version of herself she kept hidden come alive in front of her coworkers. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I sat on the floor of my tiny hotel room, surrounded by evidence of a woman I no longer recognized, and something in my brain clicked. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was about deception so layered, so deliberate, it had to be covering something worse. And that's when I saw it, the thing that changed everything. A draft email, unsent, still sitting in her drafts folder. No recipient, no subject, just 5 lines typed in a way that felt like a confession accidentally left behind. He's starting to suspect. If he asks again, I'll deny it. Toronto was a mistake. Daniel doesn't know about the first one. I don't think I can keep this up. I stared at those words until they stopped feeling real. She never sent it. She either forgot or got interrupted. But it was dated 2 months before the ring, before I knew anything. Which meant, at some point, she expected to be caught. She was preparing her lies ahead of time. Toronto, Daniel, the first one. That meant there was someone before even the man from the emails. Someone I hadn't uncovered. Someone even Daniel didn't know about. The bottom of my stomach dropped. My skin went numb. I had pulled a thread thinking it would unravel the truth. Instead, it was revealing a web. One I was caught in long before I even noticed the strands. And if Riley had built this much around secrecy, what had she been protecting? Or worse, what had she been hiding from? I didn't sleep again. 2 nights in a row. My brain felt like a projector spinning film reels that didn't belong to me. I kept rereading the draft email. He wasn't the first. I don't think I can keep this up. She had written it months ago and never sent it, probably assuming it would be lost to the digital void. But it wasn't. It sat quietly, waiting to be found by someone like me, someone desperate enough to dig through every bite of what used to be his life. It didn't matter that it was unsent. It was honest. It was raw. And it pointed toward a man who'd come before Daniel, before the guy from the corporate retreat, before any of this seemed to start. That meant there was a crack further back in time than I ever imagined. If I wanted answers, I had to go there. Not physically, emotionally. Back to a year I never questioned. Back to the version of Riley who still kissed my cheek when I cooked, who still sent me photos of dogs she saw on the street, who still asked if I needed anything when she stopped for coffee. Back to 2020. She took a trip that summer. Said she needed a break from our place during lockdown. Said the walls were making her claustrophobic and her mother had a cabin upstate that she hadn't visited in years. I didn't argue. We were all unraveling in our own quiet ways during that year. I figured solitude might reset her. I stayed behind to work and barely noticed how strange it was that she didn't FaceTime once during that entire week. Until now. I dug through our shared photo library, the cloud drive that automatically synced anything we saved. She must have forgotten it was still active on her tablet. Inside, buried under folders named Bills and Design Ideas, was one titled June Trip. Inside were 4 photos. A blurry dock at sunset, a half-finished glass of wine on a wooden railing, a reflection of her legs in a lake, and one that stopped my breath cold. It was taken through a car windshield. You could see the dashboard, slightly dusty, the gas station in the background, and in the passenger seat, a man. Not a full face, just part of a jawline, some stubble, a faded tattoo on the side of his neck. But it was enough. He wasn't Daniel. He wasn't the married man from the retreat. He was someone else entirely. I cropped the image, ran a reverse search through a dozen image recognition tools. Nothing. I uploaded the tattoo section to a public forum for ink collectors. A user responded within 20 minutes. Said the design looked like the insignia from a small army battalion that served overseas, mid-2000s. Not common, he wrote. Could narrow it down if you know where the guy's from. And then I remembered something. Riley once mentioned an ex from before we met who'd done a few tours, said he was too intense. Never explained why they broke up. I'd never heard his name, but now I wanted it. I reached out to her best friend from back then, Chelsea. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years. I messaged her through Instagram, half expecting to be ignored. She replied in 4 minutes. If this is about Riley, you really should just let it go. But if you're talking about Adam, that guy was a ghost long before you came along. Adam. Finally, a name. Chelsea agreed to meet for coffee. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to make her uncomfortable. She said Adam was one of those guys who never left quietly. Said Riley had tried to file a restraining order, but dropped it a month later. Said he used to show up at her work by accident, but never did anything illegal. Just unsettling. He was the first man Riley ever lied about. She told me he'd moved out of state. Told her friends he was unstable, but manageable. But Chelsea had a different version, one where Riley was obsessed. One where she kept tabs on him, even after she moved in with me. She'd follow his new girlfriend's Instagram, screenshot her photos, make comments about her clothes, her weight. It was like watching someone spy on their own ghost, Chelsea said, sipping her cold brew without looking at me. Then she told me something I wish I hadn't heard. Adam vanished in late 2021. Just gone. No posts. No calls. No contact. Riley stopped talking about him. Said she'd finally let it go. But I don't think she did. I think something happened. That night, I stared at the photo again. At the tattoo. At the edge of that man's face, caught in the reflection of a windshield during a trip I never questioned. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't a story about betrayal anymore. It might be a story about someone disappearing. And the woman I married might have been more than just unfaithful. She might have been running from something she did. Or worse, making sure no one ever found out. I started Googling the name at 2:13 a.m. The only light in the hotel room coming from the glow of my screen. I typed it over and over, Adam Farrow. Riley had never mentioned the last name, but Chelsea had let it slip between sips of her drink, thinking I already knew. I didn't, but now I did. And now I was deep in a rabbit hole that didn't feel like it had a bottom. At first, I found nothing. No social media, no LinkedIn, no public arrest records or obituaries. Just fragments, a high school wrestling team photo from 2004, a half-broken blog link that hadn't been updated in over a decade. Then I found it. A missing persons listing buried 4 pages deep in search results on a regional news site from the Adirondacks. Adam Farrow, age 36. Last seen near Blue Pine Lake, November 17, 2021. Family and friends report no activity on social media or phone records. Sheriff's Department has opened a non-criminal investigation pending further leads. That's it. No photo. No suspects. No foul play mentioned. Just a man who apparently walked off the edge of the map. But Blue Pine Lake, that caught me. Because Riley's cabin trip in 2020, that was in the same region. She said it belonged to her family, that she'd needed a week of pure quiet. I never asked for the address. Why would I? She sent me photos of pine trees and paperback novels, voice notes about making pancakes and morning swims. Now I was wondering if the man in the passenger seat of that car was the same one who vanished a year later. I spent the next day calling every sheriff's department in upstate New York pretending to be a podcaster working on a Missing Men of the Adirondacks series. Most didn't bite. A few transferred me around until someone eventually pointed me toward a retired investigator named Callahan who'd quietly consulted on Adam Farrow's case when it stalled. I found him living in a suburb outside Scroon Lake, and against all odds, he agreed to talk. Probably out of boredom, or curiosity, or maybe just the sound of someone who didn't treat the case like a dead end. We met at a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1983. Callahan was in his 60s, heavy-set, tired eyes, but sharp behind them. He stirred his coffee 5 times before speaking. "You're not a podcaster," he said. "No," I admitted. I think I knew someone connected to him." He stared at me for a beat too long. "You know how many people say that after someone disappears?" he muttered. "But they don't mean it. Not really. They're curious. Morbid. Maybe they want to feel close to something unsolved without getting their hands dirty." "I'm different," I said. "That's what they all say." I slid the photo across the table. The blurry one from Riley's cloud folder, the reflection in the windshield, the tattoo. Callahan's eyes changed. That's him, he said. Jesus. That's the first real thing I've seen in 3 years. My throat dried instantly. Are you sure? I'd recognize that tattoo anywhere. He got it after his second deployment. Said it was a reminder to keep his promises. Didn't seem to work out. I asked what they knew about his disappearance. He leaned in, voice lower now. Neighbors said they saw him arguing with someone near the lake a week before he went missing. Described a woman, early 30s, dark hair, small frame. Said she drove a black SUV with a cracked taillight. My stomach dropped. Riley drove a black SUV back then. And 2 weeks after that trip, I remember her taking it into the shop, saying someone had tapped her bumper in a parking lot. I never questioned it. She showed me the dent, the paperwork, even asked me to pick her up from the repair shop. Now I wondered if that entire story was staged. I pressed Callahan harder, asked if they ever suspected foul play. He nodded slowly. We didn't have a body. No blood. No sign of struggle. But Adam wasn't the type to ghost. We think something happened out there, but without evidence, he trailed off. Who is she? The woman in your photo? I didn't answer, because for the first time, I wasn't sure who Riley really was. Back at the hotel, I opened her email again. Read the unsent draft. Toronto was a mistake. I don't think I can keep this up. She hadn't just been hiding affairs. She was unraveling under the weight of something worse. Something buried. Something she thought no one would ever go looking for. But I was already too deep. And now, for the first time in this entire twisted descent, I asked myself a question I wasn't prepared for. What if I'm not the victim in this story anymore? What if I'm just the next name on her list? The funny thing about memory is how it hoards useless things, song lyrics from middle school, the smell of your first apartment's hallway, and forgets the ones that might save you. But sometimes, buried beneath all the chaos, it gives you a gift. A detail you didn't know you remembered until you do. In my case, it was a sticker. For years ago, Riley and I drove to that cabin together, back when it was still ours, before all the secrets began. She stopped at a roadside diner that sold weird maple syrup bottles and bumper stickers shaped like bears. I remembered because she bought one, a bear silhouette with the words Blue Pine Lake, Still Wild stamped across its chest. She stuck it inside the glove box. Said it was tacky but charming. I had no reason to think of it again. Until now. I drove 8 hours through rain and mist, all the way upstate. I don't know what I expected to find. Closure? A body? Maybe just the truth, even if it hurt. But when I arrived at the edge of Blue Pine Lake, the cabin was empty. Old. Dust-covered. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. No power. No water. Just the wind rattling the windows like it was trying to whisper something forgotten. I didn't break in. I stood on the porch, stared at the woods, and listened. The truth hit me then. Adam wasn't here. He was never buried beneath the floorboards. There was no shallow grave, no secret crawl space. There was only speculation. Riley hadn't killed anyone. Maybe she'd argued. Maybe she'd said something cruel. Maybe he left that lake broken in a way no search party could fix. But she hadn't murdered him. She'd only been trying to outrun guilt. For months, I thought Riley was a monster. But now, I saw her clearly for the first time in years. She was human. Messy. Flawed. Someone who had built a web of lies not because she was evil, but because she didn't know how to be honest with herself, let alone me. She cheated. She broke promises. She hurt people, yes. But she wasn't the villain I had created in my obsession. I was no longer angry. Just done. I left the lake, drove home with the windows down and no music playing. I didn't tell Riley I had gone. Didn't text her. Didn't confront her with the folder of files, or the photos, or the time-stamped evidence of her past. I deleted it all. Every folder. Every backup. Every saved email. I packed a bag that night, found a rental 2 towns over, and moved out 2 days later. No screaming. No final fight. Just silence. A silence she finally understood. She sent one text. Is this really it? I didn't respond. Because I was already gone. Now, it's been 6 months. I see a therapist once a week. I go to yoga, even if I hate the music. I adopted a dog named Juniper who chews everything I own. I'm learning to cook without YouTube. And for the first time in what feels like forever, I'm breathing like it matters. Riley and I are divorced. It was clean. Cold. Mutually signed. I heard from a friend she's moved to another city. New job. New life. I wish her well. I mean that. Because sometimes, The best revenge isn't destruction. It's survival. And sometimes the best closure doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from walking away before you lose yourself trying.